If you're watching this video, chances are you've already seen Blur's disastrous performance at Coachella this year, but if you haven't, here's a reminder. As you can imagine, this has led to an explosion of attention online, from media outlets to fans of the band. People are outraged that this could be Blur's last ever gig, and it was wasted on a crowd who didn't seem to care. But I'm going to say something controversial here. As a last gig, it kind of works for Blur. I know that sounds crazy, but in this video, I'm going to give you a brief history of what the band went through in the 1990s to help explain what I mean. In the early days of the band, they suffered a lot from label interference. They formed in 1988 under the name Seymour, and upon signing with their record label Food, they were given a list of more marketable alternatives. They chose Blur from this list, but this began an unfortunate trend and struggle for Blur's identity with their record label. Indeed, the more punky and experimental style was toned down in favour of baggy Manchester indie dance pop. And hey, this seemed to have worked for a while. Their first two singles were hits in the UK. But their third single, Bang, was a flop. Their first album sold decently, but it got poor reviews. And the band has since gone on to disown the record entirely, whilst also recognising how important this failure was to their development. More on that later. But notoriously, Blur followed up the album with a tour of North America in 1992. This was gruelling. It was a 44-date sprawl, which ended up costing the band £160,000 in debt, which they only paid off as recently as 2 years ago. So what the hell happened? Well, you can hear it from the band yourself.
We saw all of these things in America and they kind of terrified us and appalled us to a degree. The behaviour, the gluttony, the sort of size of everything, it terrified us. We felt really small. And I suppose, so you add to that the kind of sort of excesses of the road and the indifference. Excess and indifference are a really bad combination.
I found a great article by someone called Thomas Beller, and he apparently supported Blur on one of these 1992 dates. And you can certainly see this toxic mix of excess and indifference, particularly the emotional impact that this had on Damon. Damon got very drunk and almost killed himself by climbing up to the rafters and hanging upside down by his knees, shouting into a megaphone. But eventually the song ended, and Damon was still hanging upside down. The rest of the band, Graham, Alex, Dave, had mostly averted their gaze while they were playing, but now they joined everyone else in staring upward into the rafters, looking worriedly at the drunken man hanging upside down by his knees, 40 feet above the floor. Blur was really unhappy on this tour. They landed in the States just as Nirvana was taking off on the college radio circuit, and they felt woefully out of touch. In addition, they weren't promoting their punky new song Pop Scene, but instead a remix of, you guessed it, Bang, their failed single. And worst of all, the label didn't even tell them that they were releasing it. Damon spent the time on tour listening to British bands like the Beatles and the Kinks, particularly the song Waterloo Sunset. But ultimately, North America was a pressure cooker for Blur to find their own unique sound and voice. They went on to create Modern Life is Rubbish, which was a cynical take on the Americanization of British culture, a vision of what Britain might become in the future, and a source to vent their frustrations about what they'd seen on their North America tour. The album isn't the strongest in their discography, and it certainly wasn't a smash hit on release, but you can see how it laid the groundwork for Blur's later character studies like Parklife, Charmless Man, and Country House. Take a song like Colin Zeal. The song opens with, Colin Zeal knows the value of mass appeal. He's a pedestrian walker, he's a civil talker, He's an affable man with a plausible plan. Damon constructs a character who plays it safe, who follows and puts stock in popular trends. He's pedestrian, he's a civil talker, he's affable and he gets on well with others. Above all, he has a plausible plan, not one that seeks to innovate or challenge the status quo, but one that already exists within it and that people can understand. In the second verse, Damon goes on to sing, "While sitting in traffic, Colin thinks in automatic." Damon uses driving as a metaphor for how following popular trends robs you of your individuality. It does the thinking for you, and you're surrounded by people travelling to the same destination. Despite what Colin Zeal might think about the value of mass appeal, Damon outlines the price that one pays for this. I can't help but draw a link between the life that Blur lived on tour in North America and the character of Colin Zeal. It's a prophetic glance at what happens if you obey the demands of a record label, pushing you to appeal to as many people as possible at the expense of your own individuality.
What was it like being in Blur last year, in 1992? As you can see, no one has anything to say about it.
And the rest is history. History that you, watching this video, are probably aware of. Blur went on to pioneer the Britpop movement, writing cynical songs about quintessential aspects of British life and culture. They paved the way for other bands and gave greater notoriety to those that were already on the circuit, particularly with their third album, Parklife, which was a runaway success. Thanks to their apathetic and dismal experience in America, Blur actually found their artistic voice and direction. They found meaning in standing up to America's sphere of influence, and this clearly had a big impact. It resonated with people in a massive way. Damon even got to perform Waterloo Sunset with Ray Davies on Channel 4's The White Room. He described this as the moment that, for him, it all came together, and he had the seal of approval from one of his heroes.
But I am so lazy, don't want to wander, I stay at home at night.
It's quite poetic really that a song that Damon turned to in his darkest days on tour in the US had now become his victory lap.
As long as I gaze on Waterloo Sunset, I am in paradise.
So when I think about Blur's performance at Coachella this year, in a weird way, I kind of think it works. It fits in with the story of a band that never quite cracked the American market. And do you know what? That was entirely the point. It was their failure in the US that prompted them to discover their own artistic voice and pave the way forward rather than become an imitation of popular trends. Damon is no longer that frustrated and angry and lost 20-something-year-old hanging off the rafters. He has nothing to prove, and he's taken the piss out of the crowd. So when I look at Coachella, I feel an enormous amount of pride for the band. I'm glad that we managed to have one last joke at America's expense. And you know what? If this was a send-off for the band, it was the perfect way to remind us of what they managed to achieve in the first place. Cheers guys, if you like this video, subscribe for more. I'm going to be making more of these over the next few months. So yeah, bye bye bye.